They were told the Americans would strip them of dignity, that captivity meant violation and shame, that surrender to the enemy was a fate worse than death itself. But when Evelyn Richter felt the soldier's hand suddenly close around the collar of her Wehrmacht auxiliary uniform on that sweltering October morning in 1945, her scream carried a different kind of terror than she'd been taught to expect. 43 women, one railway platform, 98 degrees Fahrenheit in the Louisiana heat, and one hand reaching for her torn shoulder seam. The numbers mattered, they always would. Evelyn was 23 years old, though her body told the story of someone much older. She had lost 45 pounds since the surrender, from 135 pounds to 90. Her Wehrmacht auxiliary uniform, once tailored to fit her frame in Berlin, now hung like a burial shroud on shoulders that jutted sharp as coat hangers. The fabric along her right collarbone had torn 3 days earlier during the rough transfer from ship to train, and she'd tried to hold it together with a safety pin borrowed from another prisoner. But the pin had disappeared somewhere between St. Louis and Memphis, and now the tear gaped open, exposing her thin undershirt and the prominent ridge of bone beneath translucent skin. She stood on the platform with her arms wrapped tight across her chest, trying to hold the uniform closed, trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear into the press of bodies around her. The other 42 women formed a tight cluster, a defensive formation born of months in transit, months of being treated like cargo, months of whispered warnings about what would happen when they finally reached American soil. The train had rolled for 72 hours across a country that seemed impossibly vast. 3 days in a single freight car with 43 women, one toilet and windows that showed them an America they'd been taught didn't exist. Green fields instead of bomb craters, intact bridges instead of twisted metal, towns with lights burning in windows instead of skeletal ruins reaching toward empty skies. Evelyn had pressed her forehead against the cold glass for hours, watching this alien landscape scroll past, trying to reconcile what she saw with everything she'd been told. The propaganda had been clear. America was a mongrel nation, weak and decadent, torn apart by racial strife and moral decay. A country on the verge of collapse, hardly worth the Reich's concern. But the farms looked prosperous, the cities looked whole. The people on station platforms, glimpsed briefly as the train slowed through towns, looked fed, and that contradiction had settled into Evelyn's chest like a stone. Now, standing on the platform at Camp Rustin, Louisiana, that stone grew heavier. The heat hit like a physical wall, wet, heat, thick heat that made her dress uniform cling to her skeletal frame and turned breathing into work. October in Germany meant frost and grey skies and the smell of coal smoke from whatever fires people could still manage to light. Here the air was thick and humid, carrying scents she couldn't identify: pine and something sweet like flowers, and underneath it all the smell that made her stomach clench with violent, painful hunger. Food. Real food. Bread, baking somewhere nearby, yeast and heat, and that particular golden smell that Evelyn had almost forgotten existed. Coffee, rich and bitter, the real kind, made from actual beans, not the roasted acorn substitutes they'd been drinking in Berlin for 2 years. And meat cooking on grills somewhere beyond the whitewashed barracks that stretched across the flat Louisiana landscape. The smell was obscene. It was cruel. It made saliva flood Evelyn's mouth, and her stomach cramp so hard she had to press one hand against her abdomen, forcing down the nausea that came with sudden hunger after months of near starvation. Around her, other women were having the same reaction. A girl from Hamburg, barely 19, still a child, really had started shaking and couldn't stop. Her teeth chattered despite the heat, and her hands trembled as she clutched a battered suitcase that held everything she owned in the world. An older woman, a former radio operator named Liesel, who'd worked in Frankfurt, kept whispering the Lord's Prayer under her breath, the words running together like water. Vater unser im Himmel, geheiligt werde dein Name. The sounds were different too, and somehow that was worse than the smells. American voices, casual and loud, without the clipped precision of German military commands. They laughed. Someone was actually laughing. A soldier standing near a jeep talking to another man, his head thrown back in genuine amusement at something his companion had said. Evelyn had not heard laughter like that in so long she'd almost forgotten what it sounded like. In Berlin, in the bunkers during the final days in the chaos after the surrender, There had been only three sounds: screaming, sobbing, or the terrible silence of people who'd run out of tears. Laughter belonged to another world, another lifetime, some impossible past when joy had been possible. The visual details were almost too much to process. The camp was orderly to the point of surreal paths, swept clean buildings painted fresh white, and flowers. Actual flowers growing in neat wooden boxes near what looked like an administrative office. Yellow blooms, bright and defiant against the white walls, growing in soil that hadn't been poisoned by bombs or salted by the scorched earth retreat of a dying empire. Evelyn stared at those flowers and felt something crack inside her chest. In Germany, nothing grew anymore, except rubble and ash. Gardens had been dug up for potatoes. Parks had been stripped for firewood. Even the trees along the boulevards of Berlin had been cut down, first for fuel, then for barricades, then just because destruction had become the only language anyone understood. But here were flowers. Decorative, useless, beautiful flowers that served no purpose except to be lovely. And that fact, that simple, terrible fact, told Evelyn more about the gulf between victor and vanquished than any propaganda speech ever could. The American soldiers moved down the platform, calling out names from clipboards, checking documents pointing toward processing buildings. They wore clean uniforms, actually clean, not just beaten against rocks and worn again, but laundered with soap and hot water until the fabric looked new. Their boots were polished. Their faces were tanned, but not gaunt. They moved with the casual confidence of men who knew where their next meal was coming from, who'd never had to choose between eating and heating, who'd never watched their cities burn. Evelyn tried to steady her breathing. She'd been trained for this, trained to remain calm, under pressure, to maintain composure in crisis situations. She'd sat in windowless rooms while bombs fell on Berlin, her fingers flying over typewriter keys, transcribing messages from the Eastern Front as the world collapsed around her. She'd decoded communications about retreats and casualties and the slow, inevitable grinding down of everything she'd believed in. She'd survived the surrender, survived the processing camps, survived the transport across an ocean on ships that stank of vomit and despair. She could survive this, whatever this was, whatever came next. But then she felt it, the pressure on her shoulder, the hand closing around her collar. Time fractured. Every warning she'd been given flooded back in a rush of adrenaline and terror. Every whispered story from the prison ships. Every half-heard rumor about what happened to women who fell into enemy hands. Every propaganda lecture about the barbarism of the Allies, the special cruelty they reserved for German women, the humiliations they would inflict as revenge for years of war. Her body responded before her mind could catch up. She jerked backward, arms coming up defensively, and the words ripped from her throat before she could stop them, words in broken, desperate English that she'd been practicing for weeks. The one phrase she thought might save her: "Please don't hurt me." The sound of her own voice shocked her, high and thin and broken, barely recognizable as her own. The other women fell silent, watching. 42 pairs of eyes turning to witness whatever was about to happen. Some of those eyes held sympathy. Some held their own fear. Some held the blank, protective numbness of people who'd learned not to feel anything at all. The soldier released her instantly. He stepped back, hands raised, palms out in the universal gesture of harmlessness. His face showed genuine confusion, then something that looked almost like hurt, as if her fear had wounded him. Evelyn stared at him, trying to process what was happening. He was young, maybe 25, no older than that. Red hair that glinted copper in the harsh Louisiana sun. Freckles scattered across sunburned skin that suggested he'd spent his life outdoors working in fields or orchards. He stood about 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, but not in the exaggerated way of propaganda posters. Just a normal man's build, strong from honest work, not from the artificial aesthetics of military culture. His uniform identified him as a private. The name tape on his chest read Fletcher in black letters. "Ma'am," he said slowly, and his accent turned the word into 2 syllables, ma'am, drawn out and soft, carrying the lazy warmth of somewhere in the deep south. "I ain't going to hurt you." He kept his hands up, making himself smaller, somehow less threatening. His voice was gentle, the kind of voice you'd use with a frightened animal or a traumatized child. "Your uniform's torn," he continued. gesturing carefully toward her shoulder without moving closer. "I was just trying to see how bad it is. You're going to freeze when the sun goes down if we don't get you something warmer. That's all. I promise." Evelyn's breath came in short, painful gasps. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The other women remained frozen, watching, waiting to see what kind of nation they'd fallen into the hands of. Private Fletcher lowered his hands slowly, carefully, telegraphing every movement. His eyes blue-grey. Evelyn noticed distantly the colour of winter skies, held nothing but concern. Not lust, not cruelty, not the cold calculation of a man deciding how to abuse his power. Just concern, simple human concern for another person's well-being. And somehow that was more terrifying than any alternative. "You speak English?" he asked gently. "A little." Evelyn managed her voice barely audible. The words felt strange in her mouth, foreign shapes her tongue had to work to form. "I speak small amount." "Good. That's good." He smiled, a brief, genuine expression that transformed his face from merely kind to something approaching warmth. "My name's Private Fletcher. Warren Fletcher, but everybody just calls me Fletcher. I'm from Georgia, that's a state down south near here, but not exactly here, if you know what I mean. I'm here to help you ladies get processed and settled. Nobody's going to hurt you. You got my word on that." My word. As if his word meant something. As if the promise of one American soldier could guarantee safety in a world where nothing was guaranteed, where words were just sounds that dissolved in air, where every assurance Evelyn had ever been given had turned to ash. But he kept his distance, kept his hands visible, kept his voice soft and steady. "We're going to get you ladies cleaned up," Fletcher continued, gesturing toward the buildings beyond the platform. "Get you fed and into some proper clothes. Then we'll get you assigned to barracks. It ain't home, but it ain't bad neither. Most important thing is you're safe here. That's what matters. You're safe. Safe." The word hung in the thick Louisiana air like something foreign, something from a language Evelyn no longer spoke. She didn't know if she believed it, didn't know if she could believe it. Belief required trust, and trust had been bombed out of her along with everything else. But she found herself nodding anyway, one small movement of her head, and Private Fletcher's smile widened. "All right, then," he said. "Let's get you ladies inside before you melt in this heat. I know it must feel like an oven after Germany. We'll get you someplace cooler." He turned and called out to the other soldiers in English too fast for Evelyn to follow. Then he looked back at the cluster of women and switched to slower, simpler words. "Follow me, please. Stay together. We'll take care of everything." The women moved as one organism, a school of fish following invisible currents. Evelyn found herself swept along with them, her hand finding Liesel's, the older woman from Frankfurt, the one who'd been praying. Liesel's fingers closed around hers, and they gripped each other like children crossing a street afraid of getting lost. The processing building was cooler inside, with ceiling fans turning slowly overhead, pushing the humid air in lazy circles. The women were directed into lines, their names checked against typed lists. Evelyn stood with her arms still wrapped around herself, hyper-aware of the torn uniform, of how thin she'd become, of how the other women around her were in similar states of malnutrition and exhaustion. They looked like survivors of something catastrophic, which Evelyn supposed they were. Around her, women whispered nervously in German, their voices tight with fear. "What will they do to us?" someone asked. "Strip search, probably," another replied grimly. "Humiliation, inspection, it's what we would have done." Evelyn said nothing. She was too tired for speculation, too numb for fear beyond the basic animal instinct that had made her scream when Fletcher touched her uniform. She simply waited, watching the American soldiers move efficiently through their paperwork, their clipboards, their bureaucratic rituals. When her turn came, she was directed behind a curtained partition. Her heart rate spiked again. This was it. This was where the cruelty would happen, behind curtains where no one could see. But when she stepped through, she found herself facing a woman. An American woman in military uniform, middle-aged with kind eyes behind round spectacles. The insignia on her uniform identified her as a captain in the medical corps. "Good afternoon," the woman said in English, her voice pitched low and soothing. "I'm Captain Pemberton. I need to do a quick health check. It won't take long and you can keep your undergarments on. I just need to check for lice, look at any injuries, and make sure you're not carrying any contagious diseases. Is that okay?" Evelyn understood maybe half the words, but the tone was clear. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Can you remove your jacket, please?" Evelyn's hands trembled as she unbuttoned the Wehrmacht jacket. The fabric was worn thin, the wool gone threadbare from too many washings and too much wear. When she slipped it off, she was acutely aware of how her collarbone jutted out, how her ribs were visible through the thin undershirt, how her arms looked like sticks wrapped in paper-thin skin. She looked like the survivors she'd seen in newsreels from the camps, the ones the Allies had liberated, the walking skeletons who'd somehow remained alive despite every effort to destroy them, and the thought made her stomach turn. Captain Pemberton's expression softened, but she didn't comment on Evelyn's appearance. She simply moved through the examination with professional efficiency, checking Evelyn's scalp for lice, examining her eyes and throat, listening to her heartbeat with a stethoscope. When she pressed her fingers against Evelyn's spine, checking for injuries, her touch was gentle. "You're malnourished," the captain said quietly, "but you're going to be okay. We're going to get some weight back on you, get you healthy again." It was the kindness in her voice that broke something in Evelyn. She'd expected coldness, clinical detachment at best, cruelty at worst. Instead, this American doctor was treating her like a human being, like someone who mattered, like someone worth healing. Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry, not here, not now. She had cried enough. When the examination was finished, Captain Pemberton handed Evelyn a bundle of clothes. Not a uniform, but civilian clothes. A cotton dress, pale blue with small white flowers printed on the fabric. Clean undergarments that smelled of soap. Thick socks, and a wool cardigan hand-knitted in a soft grey yarn. "Your old uniform's pretty worn out," the captain explained. "You can keep it if you want for sentimental reasons, but you'll be more comfortable in these." The dress and undergarments were donated from local churches. The cardigan was knitted by a volunteer group in town. "It gets cold here at night, even in October. Not like Germany cold, but cold enough." Evelyn took the clothes with trembling hands. The cotton dress was soft. Actually soft, not the rough, scratchy fabric of wartime substitutes. The cardigan was even softer, and when she held it to her face, it smelled like lavender soap. Real soap. The kind that came from flowers, not from whatever chemical concoctions they'd been rationed in Berlin. She hadn't owned anything this nice since before the war, since before her world had ended. "Thank you," she whispered in German, then corrected herself in halting English. "Thank you, thank you." Captain Pemberton smiled. "You're welcome, honey. There's a shower facility next door, hot water soap shampoo. You take your time, all right. Get yourself cleaned up. When you're done, there's food in the mess hall. I know you're probably starving, but take it slow, okay? Your stomach's going to need time to adjust to regular meals again." Evelyn nodded, clutching the clothes to her chest like a lifeline. The shower facility was tiled in white with individual stalls and curtains for privacy. Evelyn stepped into one and pulled the curtain closed, sealing herself into a small space that felt almost safe. She stripped off her Wehrmacht uniform, the last physical connection to who she'd been, and hung it carefully on a hook. She might never wear it again, but she couldn't quite bring herself to discard it. Not yet. Then she turned on the water. Hot water hit her skin, and Evelyn could not stop the sob that tore from her throat. It had been 6 months. 6 months since she'd had a proper hot shower. 6 months of cold water splashed from buckets of washing in whatever was available of feeling perpetually dirty, no matter how hard she tried to scrub. On the prison ships they'd been hosed down once a week with freezing seawater, that was all. That was the extent of hygiene for women being transported like cattle across an ocean. But this was 105 degrees of clean, hot water pouring over her skin like absolution. She stood under the spray for 17 minutes, she counted every one, and cried. Great heaving sobs that shook her skeletal frame. She reached for the soap, a white bar that actually lathered, that smelled like something clean and simple, and scrubbed her skin until it was pink and raw. She washed her hair 3 times, watching the water run grey with accumulated grime, then brown, then finally clear. Her scalp tingled. Her skin tingled. Everything tingled with the shock of being clean. When she finally shut off the water, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the sink. For a moment, she didn't recognize the face looking back. The woman in the mirror had clean hair that hung in dark, damp waves around her face, had skin that was pale but no longer grey with dirt, had eyes blue and large in her thin face that looked younger than Evelyn felt. She looked human again, not like a survivor, not like a prisoner, just human. She dressed slowly in the donated clothes. The cotton dress hung loose on her frame. It had been sized for a woman with more flesh on her bones, but it was clean and soft and the most comfortable thing she'd worn in 2 years. The cardigan was warm without being heavy, the kind of thing her grandmother might have knitted. She pulled it tight around herself, breathing in the lavender scent, and felt something dangerous stir in her chest. Hope. She tried to push it down. Hope was dangerous. Hope would make this harder when the other shoe inevitably dropped, when the Americans revealed what they really wanted from their prisoners when the cruelty came. But it bloomed anyway, fragile and persistent, like those yellow flowers she'd seen growing outside the administrative building. The mess hall was large and bright, with long tables and benches arranged in neat rows. Sunlight streamed through windows that actually had glass in them, whole panes not boarded over or blown out. The smell of food was overwhelming, making Evelyn's head swim and her stomach cramp with need. She joined the line of women moving slowly toward the serving counter. Each of them looked shell-shocked, moving like people in a dream. They wore their donated dresses and cardigans, their hair still damp from showers, their faces showing the same confused mixture of gratitude and guilt that Evelyn felt. At the serving counter, American soldiers in white aprons ladled food onto metal trays. Real food. Food that Evelyn stared at, because she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. Mashed potatoes, fluffy and white with butter melting into golden pools. 8 ounces at least, maybe more. Green beans fresh, not canned, still bright green and glossy. 6 ounces. Meatloaf, a thick slice, at least 10 ounces with brown gravy pooled around it on the tray. A dinner roll warm enough that butter melted when they placed a pat on top. 1 tablespoon of butter. Real butter. Coffee in a tin cup, 12 ounces with real cream and real sugar available on the side. And dessert. There was dessert. Apple pie, a slice that had to weigh 6 ounces with visible cinnamon, and a flaky crust that looked like it had been made by someone's grandmother. Evelyn carried her tray to a table on legs that felt like they might give out. She sat down carefully, setting the tray in front of her, and just stared. Around her, other women were having similar reactions. Some were crying, some were laughing high, slightly hysterical laughter that bordered on tears. Some were eating so fast they were making themselves sick, shoveling food into their mouths as if afraid it would disappear. Evelyn forced herself to eat slowly. Captain Pemberton had said to take it slow, and Evelyn had enough medical knowledge to understand why. Her stomach had shrunk. Her body wasn't used to rich food anymore. If she ate too fast, she'd vomit it back up, and she couldn't bear the thought of wasting any of this. She picked up her fork and cut a small piece of meatloaf. The first bite was so rich it made her dizzy. The meat was seasoned, actually seasoned with herbs and salt and pepper, and something savory she couldn't name. There were breadcrumbs mixed in, and onions, and the texture was tender and moist. It practically dissolved on her tongue. She swallowed and had to close her eyes against the rush of sensation. Next, a small forkful of mashed potatoes. They were creamy, impossibly creamy, with butter coating her tongue. The texture was smooth without lumps, without the grittiness of potatoes stretched with sawdust or other substitutes. These were real potatoes prepared with care, seasoned properly. The green beans crunched between her teeth, actually crunched with the texture of vegetables that were fresh, that hadn't been boiled to grey mush. They tasted like summer, like gardens, like a world where food was abundant enough to be prepared properly. She sipped the coffee. It was bitter, real coffee. Bitter, but there was cream on the table, and when she added it, the bitterness mellowed into something almost luxurious. But it was the apple pie that undid her. Evelyn had been holding off on the pie, saving it, because it seemed almost obscene to eat dessert when she'd spent the last year barely getting enough calories to survive. But finally she picked up her fork and cut into the slice. The first bite hit her tongue and the sweetness was almost violent. Sugar. Real sugar, not saccharin or honey stretched thin. Cinnamon, the warm, complex spice that her mother used to put in Christmas cookies. Apples tender and soft cooked until they were sweet and tart at the same time, and the crust buttery and flaky, dissolving into shards that mixed with the filling. It tasted like childhood, like holidays. Like the last Christmas before Matthias had gone to the Eastern Front, when they'd had one precious apple pie that her mother had made with hoarded rations, and Matthias had eaten his slice, slowly savouring every bite, saying it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. Matthias had been 19 then, grinning across the table with his too long hair and his too thin face and his eyes that still held some light despite everything. He'd joined the Wehrmacht 2 weeks later. He died at Stalingrad 3 months after that. 19 years old, frozen in a ditch on the Eastern Front. His body never recovered, never buried, just another casualty among millions. And Evelyn was here safe and fed eating apple pie, while her mother in Berlin probably couldn't remember what fruit tasted like. The fork dropped from her hand, clattering against the metal tray. She pressed both hands against her face, trying to hold back the sobs, but they came anyway. Great, gasping, uncontrollable sobs that shook her whole body. A hand touched her shoulder gently. Evelyn flinched but didn't pull away. When she looked up through her tears, she saw Private Fletcher standing beside her. He was holding a handkerchief, white, pressed with the initials WWF embroidered in one corner in careful blue thread. "It's okay to cry, Ma'am," he said softly, his southern accent gentle. "I reckon you got a lot to cry about. But you're safe here. I know that probably don't mean much right now, but it's the truth. You're safe, you're fed, and nobody's going to hurt you. I give you my word on that." Evelyn took the handkerchief with shaking hands. The fabric was soft clean, and she pressed it against her face, trying to muffle the sobs. "I'm sorry," she managed in broken English. "I do not mean to be." "Weak. Ain't weakness, ma'am." Fletcher's voice was firm. "It's being human. You finish your meal. Take your time. When you're ready, we'll get you settled in your barracks. There ain't no rush." He stood there for another moment, a quiet presence, and then moved away to help another woman who was struggling with her tray. Evelyn watched him go, this American soldier who'd shown her more kindness in one afternoon than she'd known in years, and felt that dangerous thing in her chest, that hope grow stronger. She picked up her fork, took another bite of pie, then another. She ate slowly, tasting every bite, letting the sweetness and the guilt and the grief mix together until she couldn't tell them apart anymore. When she finally set down her fork, her tray was clean, and her stomach was fuller than it had been in months. She sat for a moment, just breathing, feeling the weight of food in her belly and the weight of impossible kindness on her shoulders. The barracks were simple but clean, a long building with rows of bunk beds, each made up with thin mattresses, white sheets, and wool blankets. There were windows that actually opened, letting in fresh air. Bathroom facilities at the end of the building with running water, both hot and cold, and flush toilets. Evelyn was assigned a lower bunk near one of the windows. She had a footlocker for personal belongings, not that she had many. Just the Wehrmacht uniform she couldn't quite discard, the handkerchief from Fletcher, and the small photograph of her family that she'd managed to keep hidden through all the transfers and searches. She sat on the mattress, testing its firmness. It was thin, barely more than padding over wooden slats, but it was clean, and it didn't smell of mold or urine or the accumulated despair of too many bodies in too small a space. It was better than her bed in Berlin had been during the final years of the war. As night fell, the women gathered in small groups, whispering in German, trying to make sense of what had happened to them. Some were still suspicious, convinced this was a trick. Others were simply grateful to be alive. A few, like Evelyn, were caught between relief and guilt. Liesel, the older woman from Frankfurt, sat down on the bunk next to Evelyn's. She was 35, with greying hair and tired eyes. "So," Liesel said quietly, This is what the enemy looks like. Hot showers and apple pie. Evelyn nodded slowly. I don't understand it, she finally managed. Neither do I, Liesl replied. She leaned closer. But I'll tell you what I think. I think they're showing us what we could have had if we'd chosen differently. I think they're showing us what the world looks like when you don't destroy it. Evelyn looked at her, seeing the pain in the older woman's eyes, and understood. They weren't just prisoners here. They were witnesses. Witnesses to their own nation's failure. Witnesses to the lie they'd been sold. That night, lying in her clean bunk under a warm blanket with a full stomach for the first time in months, Evelyn stared at the ceiling and whispered a prayer of gratitude for being alive, for being clean, for being impossibly, inexplicably safe. But gratitude, she was learning, was its own kind of punishment. Because how could she be grateful when her family was suffering? How could she feel relief when her mother was starving? How could she accept kindness from the people who'd destroyed everything she'd known, the contradictions piled up like rubble? And somewhere beneath it all, that dangerous thing continued to grow. Hope. The first betrayal, the first crack in everything she'd believed. The rhythm of Camp Rustin became Evelyn's new reality. 7 o'clock bells. Breakfast that never varied eggs toast with real butter coffee. Work details that felt more like therapy than labor. And everywhere the casual kindness of people who should have been her executioners. By early November, Evelyn had gained back 8 pounds. Her face no longer looked skeletal. When she caught her reflection in the administrative office window, she sometimes didn't recognize herself, not because she looked different, but because she looked alive. She worked 5 days a week in the cramped office, 20 feet by 15 feet, 2 metal desks, 1 filing cabinet, and a typewriter that skipped the letter E. Her job was simple: organize German documents, translate headers, file alphabetically. Mindless work that let her thoughts wander. Private Fletcher worked at the desk opposite hers. He hummed while he sorted papers, usually hymns, sometimes country music, songs about trains and heartbreak and going home. On her 3rd day, he looked up. "You know any German songs, Miss Richter?" She froze, uncertain if this was a test. "A few." "Well, don't be shy. This office could use some culture." So she hummed Guten Abend, Gute Nacht, a lullaby her mother used to sing. Fletcher listened, then smiled. "That's real pretty. What's it about?" "It is lullaby. About good evening, good night, sleep under roses." "We got something similar. Hush, little baby." He pulled out his wallet, extracting a photograph. "That's my family. Spring of '44, right before I shipped out." The photograph showed a white farmhouse with a porch, peach trees in the background, a woman in a floral dress. Fletcher's mother, Nadine, stood beside a teenage girl with his same red hair. "That's Cece, Cecilia proper, but nobody calls her that. She's 16 now, wants to be a teacher, Shakespeare and all that." Evelyn studied the photo, trying to imagine a world where your biggest concern was teaching Shakespeare. "Your family is very beautiful," she said. Fletcher tucked it away carefully. "What about yours?" She hesitated, then pulled from her pocket the photograph she'd kept hidden. Her family in 1940, before everything. Her mother, Annalisa, only 42 then. Her father, Otto, in his Sunday suit. Her brother, Matthias, 17, grinning. And herself, 20, with flowers in her hair. "That's a real nice family," Fletcher said gently. "You look happy." "We were," Evelyn whispered, "before." The daily English lessons became the highlight of Evelyn's mornings. "It's raining cats and dogs," Fletcher said one Tuesday, pointing at the downpour. Evelyn frowned. "But I see only water, no animals." Fletcher laughed. "It's just an expression, ma'am. Means it's raining real hard. Why cats and dogs? Why not horses and cows?" "You know, I never thought about it." "In Germany we say, es regnet Bindfäden." She struggled. "It rains. Strings of rain. I like that. Makes more sense than animals." She taught him German words in return. Gemütlichkeit came out sounding like Gemütlichkeit, which made her laugh the first time since arriving. "What's it mean?" Fletcher asked. "It is feeling. Like cozy, but more. Like when you are with family, safe, warm, everything is good. There is no English word exact." Fletcher nodded. We got something close, homey, or just being home. He paused. You miss it. Evelyn looked at the requisition form she'd been translating. I miss what it was, before the war, before everything burned. But that home does not exist anymore, so I do not know what I miss now. The canteen opened Wednesday afternoons and Saturday mornings. Just a corner of the recreation hall with shelves of basics, soap writing paper pencils, magazines, candy bars. A Hershey's bar cost 5 cents. Writing paper 3 cents for 20 sheets. Evelyn saved her 80 cents daily wage religiously. By month's end, she had $19.20. She bought a notebook, green cover, 100 lined pages, and 2 pencils. That night, she began a diary. November 3rd, 1945. I do not know why I write this. Perhaps because if I do not, I will forget what is real. Today I ate real eggs, golden yolk, not grey powder, 2 pieces of toast with real butter, coffee with cream. Private Fletcher taught me, break a leg means good luck. But you say the opposite. I do not understand American logic. Mutter, if you could see this place, you would not believe it. The enemy feeds us better than our own country did in the last years. What does this mean? I am ashamed. I am grateful. I am confused. I am still alive. She wrote every night, sometimes a few lines, sometimes pages of observations and the slow unraveling of everything she'd believed. The letter arrived November 8th. German Nationals mail distribution at 1400 hours recreation hall. Evelyn's heart hammered. Mail meant contact. Mail meant her mother knew she was alive. She rushed to the recreation hall. An American sergeant called names from a stack of thin envelopes. Richter Evelyn. Her hand shook, taking it. The paper was nearly transparent, her mother's handwriting shakier than she remembered. Postmark, Berlin, 15th of October, 1945. On 24 days in transit, she walked to the barracks, sat on her bunk, and slit it open with her thumbnail. My dearest Evelyn, I do not know if this letter will reach you. I do not know if you are alive. We have heard nothing. The Red Cross gives no information. We have only prayers. Berlin is ash. You would not recognize it. The Tiergarten is stumps. The cathedral is skeleton. Our street is rubble. We live in the basement, 11 people in 3 rooms. The Hoffmans, the Bowers, their children and me. No heat. We burn furniture when we find it. Electricity maybe 2 hours daily. Water from a pump 6 blocks away. Yesterday, Aunt Gertrude traded her wedding ring for half a loaf of bread. Gold band, worn 40 years. The bread was 3 days old with mould. We cut off the mould and ate the rest. It tasted like heaven. Your father, no word. Somewhere in the Soviet zone. We pray he is alive, but fear the worst. Mrs. Hoffman's son returned from the Eastern Front. No legs below the knees, no eyes. The blast took them. He begs his mother to let him die. She sits with him and weeps. He is 19 years old. If you are reading this, I thank God. I thank whatever mercy exists. Do not worry for us. We will survive. Germans are good at surviving. I love you, my darling girl. Come home when you can. Your loving Mutter Anneliese Richter. Evelyn read it 3 times, folded it carefully, tucked it under her pillow. She sat very still, hands folded, and felt something inside her chest crack. At dinner, she couldn't eat. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, a roll, chocolate cake. She stared at it like it was obscene. Her mother was eating mouldy bread, traded for her aunt's wedding ring, and Evelyn was being served chocolate cake. She pushed the tray away. You need to eat, miss, a kitchen worker said. I am not hungry. It was a lie. She was always hungry. But hunger felt appropriate now. Hunger felt like solidarity. That night she wrote, Mutter is eating garbage. I am eating cake. This is wrong. Aunt Gertrude's ring is gone. 40 years of marriage melted down for half a loaf of mouldy bread. I should be there. I should be suffering with them. Instead, I am here, safe, fed, warm. I am a traitor for being alive. She began refusing food systematically. Day 1, 30%. Day 2, 10%. Day 5, nothing. just pushed trays away while her stomach cramped and her head grew light. Liesl noticed. On day 7, she sat across from Evelyn at lunch. "You're starving yourself. Why?" Evelyn showed her the letter. Liesl read in silence, handed it back. "My sister wrote similar. Hamburg is the same, but starving yourself helps no one. It doesn't feed your mother. It just makes 2 people hungry instead of 1. I cannot eat while she starves." "No," Liesl said firmly. "Betrayal would be dying here of foolish pride while she waits for you to come home. You think she wants you to starve?" "I think I do not know what I think anymore." By day 8, she'd lost 5 pounds. Captain Pemberton pulled her aside. "Miss Richter, you're not eating. This is a problem." "I am fine." "You're not. If this continues, I'll have to put you on medical watch, possibly force-feeding." Evelyn said nothing. "Why? Why are you doing this?" Evelyn couldn't answer. How could she explain the crushing guilt, the obscenity of chocolate cake while her mother ate mold? Fletcher noticed. Of course he did. Day 9 lunch break. He walked in carrying 2 tin cups of coffee, set one in front of her. "Miss Richter, you need to eat." "I am not hungry." "That's a lie. You're starving yourself. I've seen it soldiers who couldn't handle the guilt of surviving. They stop eating, stop sleeping, stop caring. Eventually they stop living." "Is that what you want?" "My mother is hungry. I got letter. She has no food. She traded ring for half bread with mold. How can I eat when she is starving?" Fletcher was quiet. Then he set down his coffee, leaned forward. "Miss Richter, I understand. But you starving yourself won't feed your mama, won't put bread in her hands, won't bring your daddy home or fix your brother's death. All it does is add 1 more person to the suffering, 2 hungry instead of 1. How does that help anybody?" "It feels right, like solidarity." "It's not solidarity. It's suicide in slow motion." His voice was firm but kind. "You need to stay strong, because when you go home you need to be healthy enough to help her, to rebuild, to take care of her. If you starve yourself now, you'll be useless to her then. You see—" Evelyn stared at her, shaking hands. "Ma'am, we ain't your enemy. I know you were taught different, but look around. You got food, shelter, medical care, safety. We're treating you like human beings because that's what you are. You were fighting for the wrong side, but you were following orders. You got caught up in something bigger than yourself. That don't make you evil. It makes you human." "It is hard," Evelyn said barely audibly, "to be treated so well by the enemy. Harder than being treated badly would be." Fletcher nodded. "I reckon that's true. Hate's easier than kindness. Kindness makes you think, makes you question everything." He paused. "But that's the point, ain't it? We're showing you a different way. Not because we're saints, but because we believe people can change. Countries can change. The world can change. But only if somebody chooses to be decent first." He stood, set his hand gently on her shoulder, brief, paternal. "Eat your lunch, Miss Richter. Your mama's going to need you strong." That afternoon, Evelyn ate. Not everything, her stomach had shrunk, but she ate. Half a sandwich, soup, and apple. Each bite tasted like betrayal and necessity mixed together. That night she wrote, "Private Fletcher is right, and that is the most complicated truth I have ever had to accept. Mutter needs me alive. Germany needs people alive who can rebuild, who can think differently. But eating feels like choosing them over her. Is it possible to do both, to survive and to honor their suffering? I do not know, but I am eating again, because Fletcher is right. And because I cannot help Mutter if I am dead." Winter came to Louisiana. Not real winter by Evelyn's standards. 45 degrees at night, maybe 50 during the day. The locals complained. Evelyn wore her cardigan and felt almost nothing. The women slowly divided into factions. On one side stood Hilde Steiner, 42, former Wehrmacht administrator from Munich. Tall, angular, iron-grey hair in a severe bun, eyes like flint. She'd managed supply logistics for the Eastern Front. Never fired a weapon, never tortured, but she'd made the trains run on time, and she refused to accept it was over. Hilda gathered followers, 8 women, sometimes 9 in the barracks corner after lights out. They whispered, but loud enough to be heard. "This is psychological warfare," Hilda would say, voice hard. "They feed us to weaken us, to make us forget who we are, to make us grateful to captors. It's no different from what we would have done. But they're not torturing us. Not with fists, but with kindness, which is more insidious. They're trying to break our spirits, make us believe the Reich was wrong, that we were wrong, that everything we fought for was evil. This is propaganda, more sophisticated than Goebbels, but propaganda nonetheless." One night in late November, Hilda's voice rose loud enough for everyone. "While our families starve, we eat turkey and pie. While our cities burn, we sleep in clean beds. While our nation bleeds, we learn English and smile at captors. This is collaboration. This is betrayal. We must maintain our dignity. We must resist." Liesel called from her bunk. "Dignity doesn't fill empty stomachs, Hilda. Resistance doesn't rebuild bombed cities. They're feeding us because we're human beings. You've already been broken. You and all the others who've accepted their charity. You've forgotten what it means to be German." "I've forgotten what it means to be a fool," Liesel replied. "We lost the war, Hilda. We lost because we were wrong. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start thinking about the future instead of clinging to a past built on lies." Silence. Evelyn could hear her own breathing, feel her heartbeat. She was caught between them, understanding Hilda's anger, believing Liesel's pragmatism. "You'll all see," Hilda said coldly, "when they show their true nature, when the kindness stops. You'll remember who you are, and you'll be ashamed of what you've become." But the cruelty never came. December arrived. The camp administration began decorating for Christmas. Evelyn watched American soldiers string electric lights on 6 pine trees. Multicolored bulbs, red, green, blue, yellow, glowing through the night. Children from the local elementary school had made paper chains. The radio broadcast Christmas carols constantly. Silent Night, in English, sounded different from Stille Nacht in German, but the melody was the same. Evelyn hummed it without thinking, then stopped feeling strange and disloyal. December 25th fell on a Tuesday. The women had been told there would be a special meal, but no one was prepared. The mess hall had been transformed. Red and green streamers, a Merry Christmas banner, electric candles on each table. The room glowed, and the food. Evelyn stood in line watching servers load her plate. Turkey. 12 ounces falling from the bone in tender strips. Golden skin fragrant with rosemary and thyme. Stuffing spilling out bread and herbs and vegetables. Honey-glazed ham. 8 ounces glaze shining like amber. Sweet potatoes with marshmallows. Mashed smooth orange as sunset marshmallows broiled golden brown. Green bean casserole. Cream of mushroom soup, crispy fried onions. 3 dinner rolls. Warm soft butter melting. Cranberry sauce. Tart sweet, still can-shaped. And pies. Apple pumpkin cherry. As much as you wanted. Evelyn carried her tray, sat down, stared. Women wept openly. Some ate frantically. Others sat frozen. A few prayed. Evelyn picked up her fork. Put it down. Picked it up again. She started with turkey. Overwhelming, rich, savory herbs complex. Rosemary, thyme, sage, butter. So tender it dissolved. Sweet potatoes, natural sweetness, plus artificial sweetness, contrasting perfectly. Green beans, texture, crunch, richness, salt. She ate slowly, trying to memorize this moment. Then the apple pie. She hesitated. The first time in October she'd broken down completely, remembering Matthias and the last Christmas before he went to the Eastern Front. The memory of him grinning, saying, "When I come back, we'll eat 10 of these," before he died at Stalingrad, 19 years old. Now 2 months later she could eat it without sobbing. But the grief remained sharp as ever. She took a bite. Sweet. Perfect. Still wrong. But she ate it anyway. For Matthias. For survival. The difference was now she understood why. After dinner, an announcement. Gifts for each prisoner donated by the Rustin community. Evelyn received a package wrapped in newspaper and string. Her hands shook untying it. Inside, navy blue mittens hand-knitted. A bar of ivory soap. A small bottle of perfume, rose-scented. And a Christmas card from a friend in Rustin. Merry Christmas. May you find peace. Anonymous. Evelyn sat on her bunk, holding these gifts, impossible, generous, incomprehensible gifts, and felt her understanding of the world shatter. These people didn't know her, had no obligation. By all logic, by all propaganda, they should hate her. She was German. She'd worked for the Wehrmacht. She was complicit. And yet, mittens, soap, perfume, a card wishing her peace. She couldn't reconcile it. That night she wrote with shaking hands, "I do not understand this country. I do not understand these people. The propaganda said they were cruel, barbaric, would destroy us. But they have given us life, dignity, more humanity than our own nation ever did. What does this mean? What am I supposed to believe now I am holding mittens knitted by a stranger, wearing perfume that smells like roses? If everything I was taught was a lie, what is true? If the enemy is more merciful than my own people, what does that make me? I do not have answers. I only have questions. And mittens that smell like wool and hope." Outside, electric lights glowed red and green and blue and yellow against the Louisiana night. Inside, Evelyn Richter lay in her clean bunk under a warm blanket, holding gifts from strangers, and felt the foundations of her entire worldview crack and begin slowly, painfully, inevitably to crumble. January came to Camp Rustin with cold rain and grey skies that reminded Evelyn of Berlin. But even the rain was different, softer, warmer, without the bite of German winter. Tuesday evening, first week of January. American soldiers set up a film projector in the recreation hall. The announcement: mandatory educational programming twice weekly. All German nationals required to attend. Hilda sneered at breakfast. "More propaganda. They'll show us American greatness while our cities burn. We should refuse." "And go where?" Liesel replied. "This is a camp, not a hotel." At 7:43 women filed into the recreation hall, folding chairs facing a white sheet, the projector clicking. Fletcher stood near the door with his clipboard. The first film, The American Revolution. Evelyn expected propaganda. Instead, she watched grainy footage of colonial farmers fighting their own government, fighting a king, and winning. The narrator. In 1776, 13 colonies declared independence from British rule. They believed governments derive their power from the consent of the governed, that when a government becomes destructive of liberty, the people have the right to alter or abolish it. Evelyn sat very still. In Germany, such words meant execution. After the film, Fletcher stood at the front. "Any questions?" Silence. The women exchanged glances. Finally, Hilda's voice sharp. "So, you celebrate rebellion. This is what you teach your children to disobey." Fletcher didn't flinch. "We teach them to think, to question, to understand that authority ain't absolute. It has to be earned by serving people, not controlling them. And yet you had slaves. Your revolution was built on hypocrisy."
"Yes, ma'am, it was. We're not perfect. But the principles that all men are created equal, that they have
Unalienable rights eventually led to abolishing slavery. It took time, a civil war, but the foundation was there." Evelyn raised her hand slowly. Fletcher's eyes found hers. "Yes, Miss Richter. In Germany, if you speak against the Führer, you die. If you question orders, you die. Obedience is highest virtue. You are saying different." Fletcher nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Obedience for its own sake ain't a virtue. It's how tyranny happens. What we value is informed consent, people choosing to follow leaders because those leaders serve the people, not because they're forced to. Without violence, without war. That's the goal. We have elections every few years, peaceful transfer of power." Evelyn's mind reeled. "But how does government work if people always disagree?" Fletcher smiled slightly. "It's messy, real messy. Takes forever to get anything done. But that's the point. When everybody gets a say, when power is spread out, it's harder for things to go real wrong. One man can't decide to invade neighbors. The system has checks and balances." That night, Evelyn wrote, "They have elections. Regular scheduled transfers of power. The people choose leaders, and if leaders fail, choose new ones. Without bloodshed. Just voting. This seems impossible, yet they function. They won the war. They are powerful, wealthy, organized. Perhaps chaos is better than the order we had. Our order led to this, to ruin defeat 43 women prisoners, learning that everything they believed was a lie. The films continued twice weekly. Each chipped away at Evelyn's understanding. Week 2, the Constitution and Bill of Rights. Freedom of speech, press, religion. Government couldn't punish citizens for criticizing it. You can criticize the president, Evelyn asked after, and nothing happens. Well, the president might not like it, but no government can't punish you. That's the First Amendment. Right there, first one, because the Founding Fathers knew if you can't speak freely, you can't have real democracy. Week 3. American elections. Footage from 1944. People standing in lines to vote. The narrator explained primaries, conventions, campaigns. Roosevelt had won a 4th term, then died in April. Vice President Truman took over. Peaceful succession even during war. The people arguing with Roosevelt in newspapers were not arrested. No, ma'am. Some were senators who disagreed with his policies. That's their job. Represent different viewpoints, debate the best course. Week 4, American schools. Children of different backgrounds in the same classrooms. Education focused on critical thinking, not party doctrine. Students can disagree with teachers. If they can back it up with evidence, sure. Education ain't about filling heads with facts. It's about teaching people how to think. Week 5. American workers. Factories, but also unions. Workers organizing, bargaining, sometimes striking. Workers can refuse to work. They can demand more money. This is legal. Within limits. Workers have rights. They're not slaves to factory owners. It's part of the balance. Neither side is absolute. Week 6, free press. Newspapers from across America. Different headlines, different editorials. Some supported Roosevelt, some opposed. All legal. A headline shown, President's policy criticized by Congress. In Germany, such a headline meant the editor's execution. How do people know what is true if every newspaper says something different? They have to think for themselves, read multiple sources, compare, use judgment. It's harder than being told what to think, but it's the only way to have a free society. After that film, as women filed out, Evelyn heard Hilda, they show the pretty parts, not Negro lynchings, Japanese internment camps, poverty. Every nation has sins. Liesl turned. The difference, Hilda, is that Americans can talk about those sins. They can protest, write articles, work to change them. In Germany, we couldn't even acknowledge problems existed. Which system has a better chance of improving? Hilda's face twisted. You've been corrupted, all of you, seduced by full bellies. You've forgotten what it means to be German. No, Liesl said quietly. I've remembered what it means to be human. There's a difference. 3 women who'd been part of Hilda's group stood and walked away from her, joining Liesl and Evelyn's side. Evelyn wrote, They have shown me a different way. A way where people matter more than nations, where individuals have worth beyond usefulness to the state, where disagreement is not treason, but the foundation of progress. I do not know if I can ever go back to believing what I believed before. I do not know if I want to. February arrived cold and damp. A grey morning, a Thursday, though Evelyn couldn't remember the exact date. She was in the administrative office filing documents. Fletcher at his desk across the room. The door opened. 2 American officers entered, deep in conversation. They didn't notice Evelyn behind the filing cabinet. How are the German women settling in? The first officer, a captain, greying hair. Better than expected, sir. A lieutenant younger. They're good workers, polite. A few learning English well. That Richter girl from Berlin, she's real sharp. Could work as a translator. Any trouble? None worth mentioning. Couple still bitter, hanging on to old ideology, but most have accepted reality. That's what they are, really. The captain's voice thoughtful. Just women who got caught up in something bigger than themselves. Most are just trying to survive, same as anybody. Can't blame them for being born German any more than we can blame ourselves for being born American. They didn't choose the war. They just got swept up in it. They're victims too. The officers collected papers and left. Evelyn stood frozen, a document forgotten in her hand. Just women who got caught up in something bigger than themselves. They're victims too. That was how they saw her. Not as Nazi, not as evil, not as something to punish, just as a woman swept up in historical forces beyond her control. A victim, a human being. The radical compassion made her knees weak. She walked slowly to Fletcher's desk. He looked up, saw her face. "You all right, Miss Richter?" "Why?" Her voice strange. "Why do you treat us this way? We are enemy. We worked for Wehrmacht. We are German. Complicit. Why do you see us as people?" Fletcher set down his pen. "Because that's what you are, ma'am. People. The war is over. Whatever side you were on, it's done now. What I see when I look at you ladies ain't enemies. I see women who lost homes, families, whole worlds. I see people who need help. Where I come from, when somebody needs help, you help them. It's that simple." "It is not simple. It is most complicated thing I have ever experienced. It would be easier if you hated us." Fletcher nodded. "I reckon that's true. Hate's simpler than compassion. But here's the thing." He leaned forward earnest. "If we treat you the way you were taught to expect with cruelty, then we become the monsters you were told we were. We prove your propaganda right. But if we treat you with decency, if we show you there's another way, then maybe, just maybe, you'll go home someday and help build something better." He paused. "That's the hope. That kindness is contagious. That treating people with dignity makes them want to treat others the same. That we can break the cycle of hatred by choosing something different." He smiled slightly. "Maybe that's naive. Maybe I'm just a Georgia farm boy. But I believe it. I have to." Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest, a fundamental reordering. "You are teaching by example, showing us humanity can survive hatred, but only if someone chooses to be human first." "That's about right. This is revolutionary. Maybe. Or maybe it's just decent." That afternoon, Evelyn stood to retrieve a file. As she reached up, she caught her reflection in the window glass. She stopped, stared. The woman looking back was unrecognizable from the skeletal creature who'd arrived in October. Her face had filled out. Her hair, clean and regularly washed, hung in dark waves. She wore the blue cotton dress, the wool cardigan. Her posture was straighter, her expression calm, almost peaceful. She looked healthy, cared for. She looked American. The realization hit like ice water. I have become the thing I was taught to hate. She'd absorbed their values, internalized their beliefs. She thought about individual dignity, freedom of speech, democratic principles. She conversed with Fletcher, laughed at his jokes, discussed ideas openly without fear. She ate their food, wore their clothes, lived by their schedules. She'd been transformed, not by force, not by propaganda, but by kindness, by daily, relentless, inexplicable kindness. The Americans hadn't broken her. They'd rebuilt her. That realization should have filled her with shame. Instead, she felt something more terrifying. She didn't want to go back. The announcement came in April during morning formation. "Ladies, I have news. Repatriation will begin in June. Germany is stabilizing under Allied occupation. It's time for you to go home." Around Evelyn, reactions varied. Some wept with joy. Others received the news in stunned silence. A few looked frightened. Hilda's voice rang out. "Finally, we return to our true fatherland." But even among Hilda's remaining followers, now just 5, enthusiasm was muted. 8 months of being fed and treated with dignity made returning to rubble less appealing. That evening, Evelyn sat on her bunk staring at the wall. Liesl sat beside her. "You're quiet." "I am afraid." "Of what?" "Everything. Going home, seeing my mother, seeing what's left of Berlin, going back to hunger and cold and—" She paused. "Going back to being who I was before." Liesl was quiet. Then, very softly, "I do not want to go home either." Evelyn turned. In Liesl's eyes, she saw her own complicated grief. "I want to stay here. Liesel continued, barely above a whisper. In this prison that feels more like freedom than any life I knew in Germany. Does that make me a traitor? I do not know. I think it makes us human. We want to survive. We want dignity. We want to live where questioning authority doesn't mean death. That is not betrayal. That is wanting to be treated like a person. But our families are suffering. I know. My mother is starving while I am safe. That guilt will never leave. But Liesel, if I go back just as broken as everyone else, how do I help? How do I rebuild? Fletcher is right. I need to be strong to help my mother, and more. She took a breath. I need to take these ideas home. Democracy, individual rights, freedom of speech. Germany needs people who learned these things, who can help build something different from the Reich. You sound like an American, Liesel said, but there was no accusation, just observation. Maybe I do. Maybe that is the point. Maybe that is what they wanted, not to break us, but to show us a different way, to send us home changed. God forgive me, Liesel whispered, but I do not want to go back to being what I was. Neither do I. They sat together in silence. Two women who'd lost everything and found something unexpected, something they couldn't name, something like hope, but more complicated. But that night in the barracks, Hilda cornered Evelyn. You're going to stay, aren't you? Hilda's voice was venom. Beg the Americans to keep you. Abandon your mother. Forget Germany. Evelyn met her eyes. If I could stay, I would, yes. The barracks went silent. 42 women stared. There, Evelyn continued, voice shaking but clear. I said it. I don't want to go back to starvation and rubble and a country built on lies. I want to stay here where I am treated like a human being, where questions don't equal death, where kindness exists. Traitor, Hilda spat. Maybe, Evelyn said, or maybe I'm the first honest person in this room, because half of you are thinking the same thing. You're just too afraid to say it. Liesel stood. She's right. I don't want to go back either. Then another woman. Nor do I. Then another. I'm terrified of going home. One by one, voices in the darkness. Admissions of the unthinkable. Hilda looked around, face white with rage, and realized she'd lost. Not to America. To honesty. May brought Louisiana heat. Peach trees beyond the fence blossomed. Fletcher brought Evelyn a peach one afternoon. From my family's farm. Well, same type. Thought you might like it. She bit carefully. Juice ran down her chin. The flesh was soft sweet with just a hint of tartness. She'd forgotten fruit could taste like this. Thank you. You're welcome. He paused. You scared about going home? Terrified. That's normal. You're heading back to a place that ain't the same. Everything's changed. You're changed too. That is what frightens me most. I am not the person I was. What if my mother doesn't recognize who I am now? What I believe, Fletcher considered. Then you teach her, gently. Show her what you learned. People can change. Countries can change. Germany can be different if people like you help make it different. That's the whole point, not to punish you, but to show you a better way so you can take it home. He pulled from his desk a package wrapped in brown paper. This is for you, for the journey. Evelyn took it with shaking hands. Inside, a small American flag, 6 by 4 inches, 8 photographs from Camp Rustin, and a letter handwritten in Fletcher's careful script. She read it there while he pretended to work. Dear Miss Richter, I wanted to give you something to remember your time here, though I reckon you won't need help remembering. You've been one of the best workers we've had, and more than that, you've been a good person to know. I've learned as much from you as you learned from me, maybe more. I hope you find your family well and that Germany can heal from all this devastation. Don't forget what you learned here. Not the English, though you got real good at it, but the bigger things, that people are people no matter where they're from. That kindness is stronger than hate. That you matter not because of what you can do for your country, but just because you're you. You have inherent worth. Don't ever forget that. If you ever need anything, or if you ever want to write, my address is on the back. I mean that. We're friends now. War don't change that. You're not my enemy. You never were. You're just someone who got caught up in something terrible and came out the other side. That makes you pretty strong. Take care of yourself, help your mother, rebuild your country, and remember you're worth saving. Your friend, Private Warren William Fletcher. Evelyn read it 3 times, folded it carefully, put it in her diary next to the family photograph. 2 different worlds, 2 versions of herself held together by paper and memory and impossible friendship. "Thank you," she said, voice thick, "for everything, for seeing me as human when I had forgotten how." "That's what friends do, ma'am." June first dawned grey and drizzling. Evelyn woke before the bell, unable to sleep. Today, she packed methodically. The blue dress, the wool cardigan, clean undergarments, the Christmas mittens, soap and perfume, her diary, the photographs, Fletcher's letter, the small American flag. At breakfast, no one ate much. They gathered in the processing yard at 10, the same yard where they'd arrived 8 months earlier. Evelyn stood with Liesl, hands clasped like children afraid of getting lost. The American soldiers who'd guarded them stood in a loose line. Some women hugged them. The cooks, doctors, administrators, all receiving tearful thanks from women who'd arrived as enemies and were leaving as something else. Fletcher found Evelyn near the buses. Without speaking, he pulled her into a brief hug, the kind you'd give a younger sister. "You take care now. Remember what I told you. I will never forget any of this. Write me sometime. Let me know how you're doing. Every Christmas, I promise. That's a long time to wait for a letter, but I'll look forward to it." The bus engine rumbled. Women began climbing aboard. Evelyn turned for one last look. The barracks, the mess hall, the administrative office, the trees with hanging moss, the flowers still growing in neat boxes. 8 months ago, this had been a prison. Now it felt like leaving home. She climbed on and found a seat near the window. As the bus pulled away, she pressed her face to the glass, watching the camp grow smaller. Fletcher stood in the yard, hand raised. She raised hers in return, holding it there until the camp disappeared around a bend. Beside her, Liesl cried silently. "We are going home," Evelyn said, "but we are also leaving home. How can both be true? I do not know, but they are." The bus rolled toward the port, toward the ships, toward Germany, toward rubble and rebuilding, toward mothers and absence and the long, slow work of healing. Evelyn clutched her suitcase and whispered a prayer, not to God exactly, but to whatever force in the universe allowed for mercy. "Thank you for showing me humanity could survive hatred, for teaching me I matter, for giving me hope when I thought hope was dead. I will carry this home. I will plant it in the ruins. I will water it with everything I learned. And maybe someday something new will grow." Evelyn Richter stepped off the train into a city she didn't recognize. Where buildings had stood, there were mountains of rubble. Where streets had run, there were paths picked through debris. The sky was visible in places it shouldn't be. She carried her suitcase, Fletcher's letter in her pocket, $19.20 in American currency. She found her mother in the basement of their bombed-out building. Annalisa Richter was 48 but looked 70. White hair, skeletal face. When she saw Evelyn, she froze. "Mutter," Evelyn whispered. Then they were in each other's arms, crying, trembling, trying to believe the other was real. "You're alive," Annalisa kept saying. "You're alive." Later, when tears had slowed, her mother held her at arm's length. "You look healthy, strong. They fed you." "Yes, Mutter. They treated you well." Evelyn thought of hot showers and apple pie and Christmas gifts from strangers. Of Fletcher teaching her English, showing her photographs of his farm. Of documentary films about democracy. Of being seen as human when she'd expected destruction. "Yes," she said simply. "They treated me well." Her mother's face crumpled. Thank God. That night, Evelyn learned her father had died in January Red Cross notification, one typed sentence. Otto Richter, deceased Soviet labor camp. She mourned him in the basement with 10 other people, all trying to survive in the ruins. The next morning, Evelyn took her saved money and bought food. Not much bread, potatoes, cheese. It cost almost everything. But watching her mother eat real food, seeing color return to her face, was worth it. "Where did you get money?" Annalisa asked. "I worked. In the camp. They paid us." "The Americans paid you?" "Yes, 80 cents a day." Evelyn paused. "Mutter, I need to tell you something about what I learned there." And so she began. Carefully, gently, she told her mother about democracy, about freedom of speech, about elections and peaceful transfers of power, about a country where disagreeing with leaders was not only permitted but encouraged. Her mother listened, confused. "This is how America works." "Yes." "And you think Germany could be like this?" "I think it must be," Evelyn said firmly. "The old way led to this." She gestured at the rubble. "We need something different, something that values people more than power, something that allows questions instead of demanding blind obedience." Annalisa was quiet. Then, "You've changed." "Yes." "You sound hopeful." "I am. The Americans showed me change is possible, that nations can rebuild, that there's more than one way to live." She pulled out Fletcher's letter, showed the photograph of his farm, his family. "This man became my friend. The enemy became my friend. If that can happen, anything can happen." Over the following months, Evelyn established a routine. She taught English to neighborhood children, 8 at first, then 12, then 20, in the basement. She traded lessons for vegetables, firewood, occasionally meat. But she taught more than English. She taught them about democracy, about questioning authority, about the idea that every person has worth regardless of their usefulness to the state. She planted seeds of ideas learned in Camp Rustin, hoping they would take root. And every Christmas, she wrote to Fletcher. December 25th, 1946. "Dear Warren, Berlin is rebuilding. Slowly, but it is happening. I am teaching English to 23 children now. But I am also teaching them what you taught me, that people matter, that questions are not treason, that kindness is stronger than hate. Mutter is stronger. We have food, not much but enough. The American zone is better than the Soviet. I am grateful we are here. I think of Camp Rustin often, of the apple pie, of your patience with my English, of Christmas gifts from strangers. These memories keep me going when things are hard. Thank you for treating me like a human being when I'd forgotten what that meant." Your friend Evelyn Fletcher always wrote back. Letters about the farm, about his mother and sister Cece, about Georgia, peach harvests and normal life. Letters that reminded Evelyn hope existed. Years passed. Evelyn married Thomas, an engineer working to rebuild Berlin's infrastructure. They had 2 children, Anna, named after her mother, and Matthias, named after her brother. When Anna was 8, Evelyn told her the story of Camp Rustin. "Mutter, were you scared?" "Every day. But the Americans showed me something important." "What?" "That the enemy is never the person standing in front of you. The real enemy is the ideology that makes you forget that person's humanity. The only way to defeat that enemy is to remember, always remember, that every person matters. Every life has worth, especially the lives of those we're told to hate." Anna considered this. "Is that why you teach us to think for ourselves, to ask questions?" "Yes, sweetheart, that's why." The letters continued. Every Christmas, for 41 years. They stopped in 1985, a brief note from Cece, explaining Warren had passed away peacefully at 64, heart attack, quick. He'd asked that Evelyn be notified. He'd kept every letter she'd sent. Evelyn received the news in 1987, sitting at her desk in Berlin, 65 years old. She opened her old diary from Camp Rustin. The pages yellowed, some entries faded. She read the last entry from June 1946. "I am leaving this place changed. Not broken, but rebuilt. Not defeated, but transformed. Private Fletcher told me I was worth saving. At the time, I did not believe him. Now I do. And I will spend the rest of my life proving it." She'd kept that promise. Through decades of teaching, through watching Germany transform from occupied territory to independent nation, through raising children who valued individual dignity over national glory. In 1949, her first student, a boy named Peter, became a teacher himself. In 1955, her daughter Anna asked why Germans had followed Hitler. Evelyn answered honestly, "Because we were told obedience was virtue, we forgot to ask obedience to what, for what purpose, at what cost." In 1961, when the Berlin Wall went up, Evelyn stood on the western side and wept. But she also taught. 23 students that year learned that walls fall when people remember their humanity. In 1989, when the wall finally came down, Evelyn was 74. She watched on television, tears streaming. Her granddaughter asked, "Did you help make this happen, Oma?" Evelyn thought of a handkerchief embroidered WWF, of apple pie and Christmas mittens, of a Georgia farmer who'd chosen kindness, of 43 women who'd carried that kindness home. "Yes," she said, "in a very small way, yes." Because that is the thing about kindness. It multiplies. It spreads. It outlives us. One act of mercy in a Louisiana prison camp. One soldier treating one prisoner with dignity. One seed planted in 1945. And in 1989 a wall falls. Private Warren Fletcher never knew. But Evelyn did. And she made sure her granddaughter knew too. Because the story doesn't end when the teller dies. It ends when the last person who remembers stops telling it. And as long as Evelyn lived, she told it. Every chance she got. To anyone who would listen. "The enemy showed me I was human," she would say, "and I spent my life proving him right."